Hello there, and welcome to Mysteries Beneath Earth. This is a place for quiet curiosity, where we drift through the deepest corridors of time, listening for the echoes of worlds that came before our own. Tonight, our journey takes us to perhaps the most pivotal moment in the last 100 million years. It is not a story of human cities, nor of clashing armies. It is a story of silence and what grows within it. We are going to a time 66 million years ago, just moments after the end of the world. The age of dinosaurs, the Mesozoic era, has just been brought to a shattering, fiery close. An asteroid, 6 miles wide, has struck the planet, and the reverberations have wiped the slate clean. Imagine, if you will, the stillness of this new world, the very first morning of the Paleogene Period. The air is thick, choked with soot and sulfur, and a veil of dust thrown up by the impact now cloaks the entire globe, blocking out the sun. This is the impact winter. For months, perhaps years, the planet is plunged into a chilling twilight. Photosynthesis on land and in the oceans has ground to a halt. The great forests are gone, reduced to charcoal and ash. The food chains that supported a world of giants have been utterly severed. When the sun finally breaks through that haze, it illuminates a landscape that is almost unrecognizable. The dominant sound is no longer the roar of a Tyrannosaurus or the browsing of a herd of Triceratops. The dominant sound is silence, broken only by the wind whistling through skeletal, burnt forests, and the drip of acid rain from a poisoned sky. This is the world our story begins in. It is not an age of giants. It is an age of survivors. In the immediate aftermath, the world was dominated by what scientists call a disaster flora. The first thing to reclaim the scorched earth was not a mighty redwood, but the humble fern. Across the globe, from North America to New Zealand, the geological record shows a sudden, overwhelming spike in fern spores, an event so distinct it's called the fern spike. It is a pale, green shroud covering a graveyard, the first sign of life returning, but a monotonous and simplified one. And beneath this carpet of ferns, in the shadows, in the cracks of the world, something was stirring. Life had not been entirely extinguished. The asteroid had acted as a great filter, and what passed through was small, adaptable, and unassuming. Insects survived. Fish in the deep oceans survived. Turtles and crocodiles, with their slow metabolisms, survived. And among them, a group of creatures that had spent the last 100 million years living in the shadow of the dinosaurs. Our distant ancestors, the mammals. The mammals of the late Cretaceous were not mighty. They were, for the most, small, nocturnal creatures. They looked like shrews or rats or tiny possums. They lived in burrows, hid in trees, and scurried underfoot. Their entire evolutionary strategy built around one simple principle: do not get noticed by the dinosaurs. Their small size meant they needed less food. Their burrowing habits shielded them from the worst of the heat blast and the subsequent cold. Their generalized diets, often centered on insects and seeds, meant they could scrape by in a world where the lush vegetation was gone. One such survivor, perhaps the survivor, is a creature known to us only through tiny teeth and jaw fragments. Its name is Purgatorius. It was likely a small, tree-dwelling or ground-dwelling creature, weighing no more than a few pounds. It was agile, whiskered, and possessed a crucial evolutionary advantage. It was a generalist. It could eat insects, fruit, and perhaps the carrion of the world that had just ended. Purgatorius is significant not just because it survived, but because it sits near the very base of the placental mammal family tree. It is, in a sense, the great everything grandfather of creatures as diverse as whales, bats, elephants, and us. This new era, the Paleocene, was therefore not a grand new beginning, but a slow, quiet, and desperate recovery. The planet itself was healing. The ecological vacuum was immense. Imagine a cathedral, once filled with the intricate songs of 100 different birds, now silent. The dinosaurs had occupied niches that were vast and varied. There were giants that browsed the treetops, armored tanks that ate low-growing ferns, bipedal carnivores that ruled the plains, and soaring pterosaurs that dominated the skies. All of these roles, these jobs in the ecosystem, were now vacant. For the first 1,000 years after the impact, life was a struggle for survival. For the first 10,000 years, it was about establishing a foothold. But as we move into the first million years of the Paleocene, something remarkable begins to happen. The mammals, freed from the suppression of their dinosaur overlords, began to experiment. The long 160-million-year-long night was over, and the mammals stepped out into the sun. This was not a rapid explosion, not at first. It was a cautious exploration. The world was still harsh, cooler than the Cretaceous had been, and the ecosystems were simplified. But the surviving mammals had time, and they had opportunity. They began to diversify, adapting to fill the empty spaces. In these early Paleocene landscapes, the dominant life forms were not yet the ones we would recognize. The planet was a world of ghosts, defined by the absence of the giants that had come before. The survivors were small, but they held within their DNA the potential for an entirely new world. They were the heirs to a broken planet, and they were about to inherit the Earth. The story of the Paleogene is the story of this inheritance. It is the story of how, from these humble, scurrying, nocturnal ancestors, the world was repopulated. It is the story of how, in the absence of giant reptiles, mammals took their first tentative steps toward becoming giants themselves. The Paleocene was the testing ground, a strange, transitional time where the rules of life were being rewritten. The world was not entirely empty of predators. The crocodiles had made it through, and in the absence of competition, they flourished. But the true threat to the early mammals came not from a reptile, but from the dinosaurs' only living descendants, the birds. As we will see, the first attempts by mammals to grow large were met by a new kind of terror, one that stalked the Paleocene forests on two legs with a giant hooked beak. But for now, in this dim post-apocalyptic dawn, the world is quiet. The great filter has done its work. The planet is a blank canvas, scarred and wounded, but ready. The age of mammals has begun, not with a roar, but with a whisper, a rustle in the undergrowth, a tiny, beating heart in the shadow of a ruined world. This is where the foundation for the giants of the future was laid, in the soil and ash of the world that was. As the dust of the great catastrophe settles, we drift forward into the heart of the Paleocene epoch. This period, spanning roughly 10 million years, is not one of recovery, but of reinvention. The world's impact winter has faded, but the climate is still chaotic, fluctuating. Yet, in this strange and simplified landscape, the surviving mammals are doing something they had never been able to do before. They are radiating, experimenting, and evolving at a pace the Earth had rarely seen. Imagine these early Paleocene forests. They are not the lush, flower-filled jungles of the late Cretaceous. They are sparser, dominated by resilient, fast-growing trees. And walking through these forests are creatures unlike any we know today. This is the first draft of the Age of Mammals, and some of the designs are strange, almost unsettling. Evolution, it seems, is throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks. The most immediate change is in size. For 160 million years, being small was a survival strategy for mammals. Now, with the dinosaurs gone, the evolutionary pressure that kept them small has vanished. Size, for the first time, becomes an advantage. It offers protection from smaller predators, better thermal regulation, and the ability to eat tougher vegetation. And so mammals begin to grow. But they grow in awkward, unfamiliar ways. These are not the sleek, efficient bodies of modern mammals. These are prototypes. Among the most successful of these early experiments are a group called the pantodonts. If you were to see one, you might not know what to make of it. Barolambda, a North American pantodont, was a prime example. It was the size of a small bear or a large pig, heavyset, with thick limbs, five-toed feet with hoof-like claws, and a surprisingly small, simple brain. Its body was a strange mosaic, part bear, part tapir, part something else entirely. It was a plant eater, one of the first mammals to achieve large herbivore status, browsing on the tough vegetation of the recovering forests. These pantodonts were successful for a time, spreading across North America and Asia. They represent a fundamental shift. For the first time, a mammal is the largest thing in its environment. But they were an evolutionary dead end, a branch of the mammal tree that would not survive the Paleocene. Their bodies were inefficient, their brains small. They were a first attempt, a placeholder in the ecological niche for large herbivore. At the same time, other experiments were unfolding. In the trees, the survivors of the Purgatorius lineage were diversifying. These are the Plesiadapiforms. Seeing one, you might think primate, but they are a ghost of what's to come. They have grasping hands and feet, but their eyes are on the sides of their heads, not forward-facing. They have claws, not nails. Many have strange, rodent-like incisors that are specialized for gnawing. They are not our direct ancestors, but more like our step-uncles, a parallel experiment in what it means to live in trees. Creatures like Plesiadapis itself looked almost like a squirrel, but with a primate's grasping ability. They were exploring the arboreal niches left empty by the birds that didn't survive the impact. And what of the predators? With the great theropods gone, the role of apex predator was also vacant. Mammals would eventually claim this role, but not yet. The first mammal carnivores were small or specialized. A group called the creodonts was emerging, but in the Paleocene, they were still relatively small. The true terrors of the Paleocene were not mammals. They were, in a strange twist of fate, the dinosaurs that had survived, the birds. But not all birds. While some were taking to the air, others were taking a different path. On the ground, in the isolation of certain continents, a new type of predator was emerging. These are the terror birds. In South America, which was becoming an island continent, this was a golden age for the Paraceratherium. But even in North America and Europe, giant birds stalked the land. The most famous is Gastornis, which was once known as Diatryma. Imagine a bird standing 7 feet tall, weighing hundreds of pounds, with a massive, robust head and a powerfully hooked beak, strong enough to shatter bone. For a long time, Gastornis was seen as the undisputed apex predator of the Paleocene, a feathered tyrant hunting the early, clumsy mammals. Recent research has complicated this picture. Chemical analysis of Gastornis bones suggests it may not have been a carnivore at all, but rather a specialized herbivore, using its immense beak to crack giant nuts and seeds, or rip tough vegetation. The jury is still out. But if it wasn't a predator, that only deepens the mystery of what was keeping the growing mammal populations in check. Perhaps the real predators were more familiar. In the waterways and swamps, the survivors of the reptile lineage were thriving. Giant crocodiles, like Bovaricicus, were formidable ambush predators, a threat to any mammal that strayed too close to the water. In a world without large theropods, the crocodilians were, for a time, the most dangerous things on the planet. This, then, is the Paleocene world. It is a world in flux, a world of strange beasts and evolutionary experiments. It is a world of placeholders. Barolambda is a placeholder for the elephant. Plesiodopus is a placeholder for the monkey. And the terror birds, whether predator or herbivore, are a placeholder for the great carnivorous mammals yet to come. This period also saw the rise of other groups that would have a long future. The earliest ancestors of the ungulates, the hoofed mammals, were appearing. These were small, nondescript creatures, but they were the beginning of the lineages that would eventually produce horses, deer, cattle, and, as we will see, whales. The Paleocene was also a time of continental drift. The supercontinent of Gondwana had long since shattered, and the continents were moving toward their modern positions. North America and Eurasia were still connected intermittently, allowing animals to migrate between them. But South America was drifting into isolation, becoming a giant evolutionary laboratory where life would take a different path. Australia, too, was separating from Antarctica, beginning its own journey of isolation. This continental separation is key to understanding the story of mammal evolution. It set the stage for different evolutionary dramas to play out on different continents, like multiple plays being staged in different theaters, all based on the same theme of recovery. The Paleocene world was, in essence, a 10 million year-long breathing space. It was the crucial, messy, and often strange transition between the age of reptiles and the true age of mammals. But as the epoch drew to a close, the planet was about to undergo another profound trauma. It would not be an asteroid from the sky, but a surge of heat from within the Earth itself. This event would wipe away the first draft of the mammal world and set the stage for the true rise of the giants. The world was about to be plunged into a profound, global fever. As we leave the strange, experimental world of the Paleocene, we drift toward a boundary 56 million years ago. The planet is about to experience a change so profound, so rapid, that it will reshape the course of life for millions of years to come. This event doesn't have a dramatic name like the impact that killed the dinosaurs. It is known by a simple clinical acronym, the PETM, the Paleocene-Eocene Thermal Maximum. But this clinical name belies its nature. It was a global fever dream, a hothouse event that stands as one of the most intense and abrupt periods of warming in Earth's entire history. Imagine the world just before this moment. The Paleocene has been relatively cool. Mammals, like the awkward pantodonts, have grown larger. The first stirrings of modern mammal groups are present. Then something happens. From deep within the Earth, or perhaps from the ocean floor, a truly colossal amount of carbon is released into the atmosphere. The exact trigger is still a subject of intense scientific debate. Was it massive volcanic eruptions in the North Atlantic, as Greenland and Europe were torn apart? Was it the destabilization of vast, frozen deposits of methane hydrate on the seafloor, which melted and bubbled up to the surface? Whatever the cause, the result was the same. In what was, geologically speaking, the blink of an eye, perhaps just a few thousand years, thousands of gigatons of carbon were pumped into the air. The planet's climate system, its great engine, was sent into overdrive. Global temperatures soared. Average temperatures around the world climbed by 5 to 8 degrees Celsius, or 9 to 14 degrees Fahrenheit. This was not a gentle warming. This was a ferocious heat wave on a planetary scale. The most dramatic changes were at the poles. During the PETM, the Arctic Ocean, which today is a landscape of permanent ice, was a warm, subtropical sea. Fossil evidence from Ellesmere Island, high in the Canadian Arctic, shows a world of swamps and forests, inhabited by turtles, alligators, and early mammals. The water temperature of the Arctic Ocean itself may have been as high as 23 degrees Celsius or 73 degrees Fahrenheit, the temperature of a modern-day swimming pool. This intense, global heat had a profound effect on life. On land, the world's flora changed. Forests spread, but they were stressed by the heat. In the oceans, the consequences were more dire. The massive injection of carbon into the atmosphere also meant a massive injection of carbon into the oceans. This created carbonic acid, and the oceans began to acidify. For the tiny, shelled creatures at the bottom of the food chain, the foraminifera, this was a catastrophe. The acidic water dissolved their calcium carbonate shells. In the geological record, scientists see this event clearly. In deep-sea sediment cores, the layers of white, chalky ooze made of countless tiny shells suddenly stop. They are replaced by a layer of dark, reddish-brown clay, almost entirely devoid of carbonate fossils. This is the boundary layer, a stark, silent memorial to a marine ecosystem in collapse. 30 to 50% of all deep-sea foraminifera species went extinct. But what about the mammals, the heirs of the Paleocene? How did they cope with this sudden, suffocating heat? The PETM acted as another great evolutionary filter, and it had a strange and lasting impact point. One of the most curious effects observed in the fossil record is dwarfing. In response to the intense heat, many mammal species, including the ancestors of horses and deer, actually became smaller. This is a recognized biological principle known as Bergmann's rule. In warmer climates, animals tend to be smaller, as a smaller body is more efficient at shedding heat. A larger body with a lower surface area to volume ratio holds heat better, which is an advantage in the cold, but a deadly liability in a hothouse. During the PETM, mammals shrank, some by as much as 30 to 50%, to cope with the relentless warmth. The tiny, dog-sized creature Cypherpus, an early ancestor of the horse, became the size of a small house cat. But the PETM was not just a story of stress and shrinkage. It was, paradoxically, a moment of profound evolutionary creation. The warming of the poles did more than just melt ice. It opened up new corridors for life. Land bridges that were previously too cold to cross, like those connecting North America and Eurasia via Greenland and the high Arctic, became warm, forested highways. And across these highways, a great migration began. It was during the PETM, driven by the changing climate, that three of the most important groups of modern mammals first appear, seemingly all at once in North America and Europe. These are the artiodactyls, the even-toed ungulates, ancestors of deer, camels, pigs, and whales. The perissodactyls, the odd-toed ungulates, ancestors of horses, rhinos, and tapirs. And crucially, the first true primates, the euprimates, with forward-facing eyes, grasping hands, and nails instead of claws. Where did they come from? The leading hypothesis is that they evolved in isolation, perhaps in Asia, and then used the hothouse world of the PETM to spread across the globe. This single event, this pulse of carbon and heat, effectively reset the board. It wiped out many of the archaic, experimental mammals of the Paleocene, like the clumsy pantodonts, which couldn't adapt quickly enough. And it cleared the way for the ancestors of the mammals that dominate the world today. The PETM was a short, sharp shock. The pulse of carbon was eventually reabsorbed by the planet, buried in sediments and absorbed by the oceans, but it took nearly 200,000 years for the climate to return to its previous state. When the fever broke, the world was a different place. The archaic giants of the Paleocene were gone. The strange, squirrel-like plesiodapiforms were in decline. And in their place, the first tiny horses, the first recognizable primates, and the first ancestors of deer were making their way in a new world. The PETM is a chillingly relevant story for us today, as it serves as the best and perhaps most terrifying natural analog for our own human-caused climate change. It shows how rapidly the Earth's systems can be pushed into a new state and how profound the biological consequences can be. But for our story, the PETM is the crucible. It is the fire in which the archaic lineages were burned away and the modern lineages were forged. The planet was now entering a new phase, the Eocene epoch. The fever of the PETM had subsided, but the world remained warm. It was about to enter a long period of global warmth, a greenhouse world that would last for millions of years. This was the Eocene optimum, and it was in this world, a planet covered in global forests, that the mammals would take their next great leap. The first experiments were over. Now, the true age of giants was about to begin. The fever of the PETM has broken, but it has left the world transformed. We are now drifting into the Eocene epoch, a time that begins around 56 million years ago. The memory of the hothouse spike has faded, but the planet has not returned to its former state. Instead, it has settled into a new, stable, and profoundly warm equilibrium. This is the Eocene optimum, and it represents one of the warmest periods of the last 66 million years. A true greenhouse planet. Imagine a world with almost no ice. Not in the Arctic, not in the Antarctic. The absence of massive ice caps means sea levels are vastly higher than today, flooding the interiors of continents and creating shallow, warm seas. But the most defining feature of this world is the forest. From the equator to the high Arctic and the coast of Antarctica, the planet is covered in trees. This is the global forest, a world of overwhelming green that in this Eocene world. If you were to stand in the high Canadian Arctic on Ellesmere Island, you would not be met with ice and tundra. You would be standing in a swampy forest of cypress and metasequoia, the dawn redwood. The average annual temperature here is perhaps 15 degrees Celsius, or 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Alligators and giant turtles wallow in the warm, dark water. Small, early primates and tapir-like creatures move through the undergrowth. And this forest, this Arctic ecosystem, experiences a phenomenon unique to a polar greenhouse, the polar night. For months on end, the forest is plunged into 24-hour darkness, yet it remains warm, a strange, humid, and perpetually dark hothouse. This global warmth and the spread of forests changed the rules for mammal evolution. The open, scrubby landscapes of the Paleocene were replaced by dense, multi-layered jungles. Life moved into the trees, and the niches for herbivores changed. In this world, we find the first true masters of this new environment. The PETM migrations have populated the world with new dynasties. Among them are the earliest recognizable horses. But do not picture a stallion galloping across the plains. Picture instead a creature like Hyaenodon, often called Eohippus, the dawn horse. It is a delicate, graceful creature, no larger than a fox or a small dog. It has 4 toes on its front feet and 3 on its back, little hooves that are more like toenails. Its teeth are small and simple, adapted for a diet of soft leaves, shoots, and fruit found on the forest floor. It is not a grazer, but a browser. Its back is arched, its legs slender, built not for speed in the open, but for darting quietly through the dense undergrowth, a shy, gentle ghost in a world of green. Paraceratherium is a testament to how profoundly the environment shapes evolution. The horse lineage began not on the plains, but as a small, secretive animal in the deep jungle. Alongside it, other groups are flourishing. The perissodactyls, the odd-toed ungulates, are diversifying rapidly. We see the ancestors of rhinos and tapirs. These are not the armored tanks of today, but smaller, browsing animals perfectly suited to the forest. One remarkable find from this period is the Messel pit in Germany. This former volcanic lake has preserved a perfect snapshot of the Eocene forest, a Rosetta Stone of life. The fossils are so exquisitely preserved that we can see the outlines of fur, the contents of stomachs, and even the iridescent shimmer on the wings of beetles. It is at Messel that we find fossils of Darwinius, better known to the public as Ida. This fossil, a juvenile female of an adapiform primate, provides a stunningly complete look at one of the euprimates, the true primates that had spread during the PETM. Adapiforms like Ida were not our direct ancestors. That honor likely belongs to a group called the Omamiids, which are closer to modern tarsiers. But they show us what this early primate radiation looked like. They had grasping hands and feet with nails, forward-facing eyes for depth perception, and a larger brain. They were built for a life of leaping and climbing, feeding on fruit and insects in the canopy. The Eocene was, in many ways, the first true age of primates. With a diversity in the trees we would not see again until much later, the forests were also filled with the quiet rustling of the artiodactyls, the even-toed ungulates. These were the ancestors of deer, pigs, and camels. A creature like Diacodexis was the earliest of this line, a tiny, rabbit-sized creature with long, slender legs, likely capable of bounding at high speed through the forest floor. These small, fleet-footed animals would one day give rise to some of the most successful and diverse groups of mammals on the planet. But the Eocene forest was not an idle. There were new predators. The creodonts, the first major group of carnivorous mammals, were becoming more formidable. Hyaenodon, a genus that would become a dominant predator, was making its first appearance. These were not cats or dogs. They were members of a different, now extinct order of carnivores. They had powerful skulls, but their teeth were different. Unlike modern carnivores, which have a single pair of specialized shearing teeth, the carnassials, creodonts had multiple shearing teeth in their jaw. They were efficient killers, the new apex predators of the forest floor, replacing the terror birds of the Paleocene. This world, this global forest of the early Eocene, was the new crucible. The PETM had cleared the board of the archaic mammals. The Eocene optimum provided a stable, warm, and rich environment, a vast buffet of leaves, fruit, and insects. It was a time of immense opportunity. The mammals that had spread across the globe were now settling in, adapting, and diversifying in this endless green. But a forest, even a global one, has an upper limit. A diet of leaves is low in nutrition, and a dense, tangled undergrowth makes moving around difficult for a very large body. The true giants, the titans of the Paleogene, could not evolve in this environment. They needed something else. They needed a different kind of food, and they needed more space. As the Eocene progressed, the first true giants would appear. But they would not be creatures of the forest. They would be something new, something bizarre, a lineage that would rise to dominance and then vanish completely, leaving behind some of the strangest fossils in the entire mammal record. The first true titans were coming. As the warm, wet Eocene epoch unfolds, the mammals are not just diversifying. They are, for the first time, truly experimenting with gigantism. The global forest, while dominant, is not uniform. In North America and Asia, vast river systems and lake basins create floodplains and more open woodlands, environments that can support larger bodies. And it is here, in the heart of the Eocene, around 48 million years ago, that we meet the first mammals to truly challenge the scale of the dinosaurs. But these are not the giants we know. They are not elephants, not rhinos, not hippos. They belong to an order of mammals so strange, so unlike anything alive today, that they seem like creatures from a fantasy novel. This extinct order is the Dinosauridae, which translates, appropriately, to terrible horns. And its most famous member is Uintatherium. To stand before a Uintatherium would be a bewildering and intimidating experience. This is an animal the size of a modern rhinoceros, weighing up to 2 or 3 tons. It is a massive, lumbering beast with a thick, heavy body and stout, pillar-like legs. But it is the head that truly captures the imagination, a head that seems to defy biological convention. The skull of Uintatherium is a masterpiece of bizarre specialization. It is large, but the brain inside is comically, almost shockingly small. This was not a creature of great intellect. Its skull is thick and bony, and from its upper surface sprout 6, and only 6, bony protuberances called ossicones. These are not true horns, but rather skin-covered knobs, similar to what you see on a modern giraffe, but far more menacing. There is a pair over the nose, a larger pair above the eyes, and another pair at the very back of the skull. We can only speculate on their purpose. Given that they were larger in males than in females, they were almost certainly for display, a way for males to intimidate rivals or attract mates. They may have also been used in combat, with males engaging in head-shoving or flank-butting contests, much like giraffes do today. But the strangeness does not end with the horns. As you look at the mouth, you see another terrifying feature. Uintatherium is an herbivore. Its cheek teeth are simple, designed for mashing soft, aquatic vegetation. Yet, from its upper jaw, 2 enormous, saber-like canine teeth descend, like daggers. These tusks, which could be up to 25 centimeters long, were protected by a strange, bony flange on the lower jaw. Again, these were much larger in males. They were clearly not for eating. Like the ossicones, they were weapons of display and combat. Uintatherium is an evolutionary paradox. A saber-toothed, 6-horned, rhinoceros-sized herbivore with the brain of a walnut. It is a perfect example of an animal pouring all of its evolutionary energy into display and size. It was one of the first mammals to truly go big. We know this creature so well because of the remarkable fossils found in the western United States, particularly in the Uinta Basin of Utah, from which it gets its name, and the Green River Formation of Wyoming. The Green River Formation is another of those incredible fossil snapshots, a series of ancient lakes that preserved a Cenozoic ecosystem in breathtaking detail. Here, Uintatherium fossils are found alongside those of fish, crocodiles, early bats, and the tiny dawn horse, Hyracotherium. It paints a picture of a world where these massive, strange beasts browsed on the lush, soft plants at the water's edge, while alligators lurked in the water and tiny horses darted through the nearby forests. Uintatherium was not alone. It was the largest member of a family that included other, similar creatures like Eobacilius. The Dinosauridae were a successful group, lasting for several million years across North America and Asia. They were the first mammals to fully occupy the megaherbivore niche, a job left vacant for 10 million years. Their success was also, in part, due to their competition. What was there to challenge a 2-ton beast with daggers and horns? The predators of the early Eocene were still relatively small. The creodonts were growing, but none were yet large enough to tackle a healthy adult Uintatherium. Its sheer size was its primary defense. This animal represents a crucial moment in our story. It proves that within just 10 to 15 million years of the dinosaurs' extinction, mammals had the evolutionary capacity to produce their own giants. But Uintatherium also teaches us a lesson in evolutionary humility. It is a dead end. The Dinosauridae, for all their spectacular success, would not last. By the middle of the Eocene, as the climate began to change and new, more efficient herbivores began to appear, these magnificent, bizarre creatures faded away. They left no descendants. They are a lost chapter, a branch of the mammal tree that flowered spectacularly and then was pruned forever. Their legacy is a question. Why this? Why this strange combination of features? The answer may be that in an ecosystem with vacant niches, evolution runs wild. Without established competitors, there is room for bizarre experiments. Uintatherium is the product of an evolutionary Wild West, where any trait that conferred an advantage, no matter how strange, could be pushed to its extreme. But Uintatherium was just one of the Eocene's giants. As this order was rising to prominence, another group of mammals was just beginning its own journey into gigantism. These were the Brontotheres, the thunder beasts, distant relatives of the horse and rhino. They too would develop horns, but in a different place and for a different purpose. The Age of Titans was just getting started, and the world was about to see a menagerie of giants that would rival the dinosaurs in their strangeness, if not their scale. The warm, dense forests and wetlands of the Eocene were not just a cradle for giant herbivores. They were also a hunting ground. The evolution of large prey, like the 2-ton Uintatherium and the emerging Brontotheres, creates an immense evolutionary pull for large predators. The role of apex predator, left vacant by the Tyrannosaurus and its kin, was the most valuable prize in the new mammal-dominated world. In the Eocene, we see the first serious contenders for this title. But these are not the predators we know. There are no lions, no tigers, no wolves. The order Carnivora, which includes all modern land carnivores, was still in its infancy, represented by small, weasel-like creatures. The kings of the Eocene were from two other, now extinct groups, each representing a different evolutionary strategy for killing. These were the creodonts and the mesonychids. The dominant predators, the most widespread and diverse, were the creodonts. We met their early forms in the Paleocene, but in the Eocene they achieved terrifying new sizes. The most prominent was the genus Hyaenodon. Despite its name, it is not related to hyenas. It was its own unique creation. A large Hyaenodon could be the size of a modern bear, with a massive skull, long muzzle, and powerful neck. Its body was long, its legs relatively short, suggesting it was not a fast, open-ground pursuit predator, but a powerful, relentless ambush hunter, perfectly suited to the Eocene woodlands. The true terror of a Hyaenodon was in its mouth. Unlike a dog or a cat, which has a single pair of shearing teeth, the carnassials, Hyaenodon had a whole row of them. Its entire cheek was a set of shears. This meant it could slice through meat and bone with incredible efficiency. But it also meant its teeth wore down throughout its life, and an old Hyaenodon with worn teeth would be unable to hunt and would starve. This dental specialization was both its greatest strength and its ultimate evolutionary weakness. For now, in the Eocene, it was the apex. Patriofelis, another creodont, was built like a bear but with a cat-like lowness, a powerful, ground-dwelling hunter. The creodonts were the brutish, powerful solution to the predator problem. But there was another, perhaps more mysterious group, vying for the top spot: the mesonychids. Mesonychids are a puzzle. For a long time, they were known as the wolf goats, as they had the sharp, carnivorous teeth of a predator, but the bodies of a hoofed animal. Their feet did not end in claws, but in small, hoof-like structures. They were quite literally wolves in ungulates' clothing. This group rose to prominence in the Paleocene and truly flourished in the Eocene. And it is in this group that we find a candidate for the largest land-based mammalian predator of all time, Andrewsarchus. our knowledge of Andrewsarchus is frustratingly, tantalizingly incomplete. It is known from a single enormous fossil, a skull nearly 3 feet long, discovered in Mongolia in 1923. That is all we have. One skull. The rest of the animal is a matter of scientific inference and imagination. That skull, however, is enough to tell us this was a monster. It is long, massive, and filled with powerful teeth. Based on the skull, early estimates, which assumed it had the proportions of a creodont or a wolf, suggested an animal 13 feet long and weighing over a ton, a predator that would dwarf a modern grizzly bear. It was, for decades, crowned the king of all mammal carnivores. But the story of Andrewsarchus has become more complicated. Recent analysis of its skull and teeth suggests it may not have been a mesonychid at all. Its closest living relatives? Not wolves, not bears, but hippos and by extension, whales. Andrewsarchus may have been an early giant member of the artiodactyls, the even-toed ungulates. Perhaps it was an entelodont, one of the hell pigs that would terrorize the world in the next epoch. This reevaluation also changes how we see its lifestyle. With hoof-like feet, it was probably not a fast runner. Its massive jaws may not have been for hunting live prey, but for scavenging or for a lifestyle more like a modern bear. An omnivore that ate everything from plants and roots to fish, carrion, and any unlucky herbivore it could catch. It may have been a giant, grizzly bear-like beachcomber, patrolling the shores of the Eocene-Tethys Sea, cracking open giant turtles with its powerful jaws. The mystery of Andrewsarchus, what it was, how it lived, what it even looked like, is a perfect summary of the Eocene predator world. It was a time of experimentation. The roles were set: large hunter, large scavenger, but the creatures filling them were prototypes. The creodonts, with their slicing teeth, and the mesonychids, with their hoofed feet, were both ultimately failed experiments. They would be outcompete and replaced by the rising order carnivora, the ancestors of dogs, cats, and bears, who had more efficient teeth and, crucially, larger, more complex brains. So, when we picture the Eocene, we must picture a world of giants hunted by other, stranger giants. A Uintatherium, with its 6 horns and saber teeth, browsing by a lake, must have been wary, not of a lion, but of a Hyaenodon lurking in the shadows or a massive, hoofed Andrewsarchus emerging from the trees. But the most profound evolutionary story of the Eocene was not happening in the forests or on the floodplains. The greatest predator of all, the one that would truly inherit the planet, was not Andrewsarchus or Hyaenodon. It was at this very moment, in these warm Eocene waters, that a different kind of mammal was looking away from the land. A new kind of giant was being born, one that would return to the ancestral home of all life. The whales were learning to walk, while the forests and plains of the Eocene were being populated by bizarre titans like Uintatherium and stalked by predators like Andrewsarchus. An entirely different, and perhaps more profound, evolutionary drama was unfolding. It was happening not in the continental interiors, but at the edges of the land, along the shores of a warm, shallow, and ancient sea. This was the Tethys Sea, a vast body of water that once separated the northern continents from Africa and India. Its coastlines were a labyrinth of estuaries, mangroves, and river deltas, rich in food. And it was here that one group of mammals turned its back on the land and began a journey back to the water. This is the story of the origin of whales. It is one of the most stunning and complete examples of macroevolution in the entire fossil record, a story that was almost entirely unknown to us just a few decades ago. It begins, improbably, with a hoofed animal. For a long time, the origin of whales was a mystery. They were clearly mammals. They breathe air, give live birth, nurse their young. But their form was so specialized, so divorced from any land creature, that linking them was difficult. Then, in the 1990s, a series of remarkable fossils began to emerge from the dry deserts of Pakistan and India. These lands were not always desert. In the Eocene, 50 million years ago, they were the swampy, delta-strewn coastline of the Tethys Sea. The story begins with a creature like Pakicetus. Discovered in 1983, Pakicetus is the missing link that scientists had been dreaming of. If you saw one, you might not think whale at all. You might think wolf or fox. It was a four-legged, land-dwelling animal, about the size of a large dog. It had a long G-snout, sharp teeth, and its legs were built for walking and running. But its skull, and specifically its inner ear, held the secret. The auditory bulla, the bone that encloses the middle ear, had a unique structure, an S-shaped fold, that is, in all the world, found only in cetaceans, whales and dolphins. This was the clue. Pakicetus was a whale. Pakicetus lived in a freshwater, river delta environment. Its teeth were suited for catching fish. It was likely a wading predator, standing in the shallows, much like a modern heron or grizzly bear, snatching fish that swam by. It was a land animal that was making its living at the water's edge. From this first step, the transition accelerated. The next fossil in our story, dating to a few million years later, is Ambulocetus natans, which literally means the walking whale that swims. This fossil is even more astounding. Ambulocetus was a creature of two worlds. It was about 10 feet long, with a large head and powerful jaws. Its hind legs were large and powerful, but they were also clearly adapted for swimming, likely used for paddling in a manner similar to an otter, or perhaps by undulating its spine like a modern mammal. Its front legs were shorter, with flexible wrists, perhaps used for steering. On land, Ambulocetus would have been clumsy. Its powerful hind legs were ill-suited for walking. It probably dragged itself, hauling out on the shore like a modern sea lion. But in the water, it would have been a formidable ambush predator. Its eyes and nostrils were positioned high on its head, allowing it to lie submerged at the surface, like a crocodile, waiting for prey to come to the water's edge. Ambulocetus was found in sediments that suggest it lived in a brackish, estuary environment, comfortable in both fresh and salt water. It was no longer just waiting. It was actively hunting in the water. The story continues with Rhodocetus. Now we are about 47 million years ago. With Rhodocetus, we see the next crucial adaptations. The nostrils have begun to migrate backward from the tip of the snout. The hind legs are smaller, more reduced, and clearly not used for walking on land at all. Most importantly, the vertebrae of the tail show signs of a powerful, muscular attachment. Rhodocetus was no longer just a paddler. It was developing a tail fluke. It was a true marine mammal, swimming with the powerful up and down spinal motion that defines modern whales. It was venturing out from the estuaries into the open, shallow seas of the Tethys. This transition from the wolf-like Pakicetus to the sea lion-like Ambulocetus to the fully marine Rhodocetus all happened in the span of less than 10 million years. This is a breathtaking pace for evolution. It was a response to an immense ecological opportunity. The coastal waters of the Eocene, warm and rich, were an untapped resource, free of the giant marine reptiles like mosasaurs that had dominated the Cretaceous. This journey back to the water is a powerful, almost poetic narrative. It is a story of adaptation, of a lineage unevolving its terrestrial traits, legs shrinking, bodies streamlining, nostrils migrating, to reconquer a world its ancestors had left hundreds of millions of years before. But this was just the beginning. These walking whales of the early Eocene were still, in a sense, coastal creatures tied to the shallow seas. They were pioneers, the true giants, the creatures that would fully claim the deep oceans and become the new apex predators of the planet, were yet to come. The Eocene Ocean was about to give birth to monsters. For nearly 22 million years, the Eocene had been a paradise of warmth. It was a greenhouse world of global forests, polar alligators, and serpentine sea monsters. This long, stable period of heat, the Eocene optimum, defined the evolution of the first generations of giant mammals. But no state in geology is permanent. As we drift to the boundary between the Eocene and the next epoch, the Oligocene, around 33.9 million years ago, the planet is on the cusp of one of the most sudden and dramatic climate shifts in its history. This was not a slow, gentle cooling. This was a catastrophic crash. In the geological record, it is known as the Eocene-Oligocene transition, or more dramatically, La Grande Coupure, the Great Cut, or the Great Break. It was an event that would fundamentally rewrite the rules of life on Earth, wiping out the Eocene's giants and paving the way for a new, harsher, and ultimately more modern world. What caused this profound shift? The culprit was not in the sky, nor in the oceans, but in the slow, relentless movement of the continents. For millions of years, the supercontinent of Gondwana had been breaking apart. Antarctica, the great southern landmass, had been the linchpin. For a long time, it remained connected to both Australia and South America, like a massive hub. Ocean currents, warm from the tropics, would flow south, hit this land barrier, and be deflected, bringing warmth to the high latitudes and keeping the planet in its greenhouse state. But now, around 34 million years ago, the final connections were severed. Australia, on its long journey north, pulled away from Antarctica. At roughly the same time, the Drake Passage, the gap between South America and the Antarctic Peninsula, was torn open by tectonic forces. Antarctica was, for the first time, completely isolated, a continent alone at the bottom of the world. This tectonic divorce had a profound and immediate effect on the world's climate engine. With no land to block their path, a new ocean current could form. This was the Antarctic Circumpolar Current. Cold water, no longer deflected to the tropics, began to circle the new, isolated Antarctic continent, round and round, getting colder and colder with each pass. It became a thermal barrier, isolating Antarctica from the warm waters of the rest of the world. The effect was a one-way trip to a deep freeze. Deprived of tropical heat, Antarctica began to freeze. Vast ice sheets, perhaps for the first time since before the dinosaurs, began to grow, spreading from the mountains to the coasts. As this massive, white, reflective ice cap grew, it reflected more and more sunlight back into space, a process called the albedo effect. This feedback loop accelerated the cooling, plunging the entire planet into a new, colder, icehouse state. The Grande Coupure was this moment of transition. Global temperatures plummeted. Sea levels fell dramatically as water was locked up in the new Antarctic ice cap. The warm, shallow seas of the Eocene, including the Tethys, began to shrink and cool. For the life that had been so perfectly adapted to the Eocene hothouse, this was a catastrophe. The Eocene-Oligocene extinction event was not as sudden as the asteroid impact, but it was just as profound. In the oceans, the warm water species were devastated. The magnificent serpentine Basilosaurus and its cousin Dorudon vanished. Their entire lineage, the Archaeocetes, was wiped out, their warm water paradise gone. They were a failed experiment, and the oceans were now open for a new type of whale, the ancestors of modern baleen and toothed whales, to evolve. On land, the effect was just as brutal. The Grande Coupure gets its name from the dramatic turnover of mammal species seen in Europe and North America. The global forests, which had defined the Eocene, could not survive the new, cooler, and drier climate. They began to shrink, to retreat, replaced by a new, tougher, and more open environment. The animals that depended on the old forests, the browsers, the fruit eaters, suffered massive extinctions. The archaic titans of the Eocene, the bizarre Uintatherium and its kin, were long gone. The Brontotheres, the thunder beasts which had grown to the size of elephants with bizarre, slingshot-shaped horns on their noses, also went extinct during this turnover. They were too specialized, their bodies too large and their brains too small to adapt to the new, tougher vegetation. The adapiform primates, Ida's relatives, which had filled the Eocene trees, vanished from the northern continents. The world had been reset. The warm, easy world of the Eocene was over. The Great Break had cleaved the Paleogene in two. On the other side of this climatic divide, a new world was being born, the Oligocene. It would be a world defined by new landscapes, new plants, and new, hardier giants. The age of forests was ending, and the age of grasslands was about to begin. The journey from land to water, begun by Pakicetus and Ambulocetus, was a resounding evolutionary success. As the Eocene progressed, these early whales, now fully aquatic, spread from the Tethys Sea and radiated across the warm oceans of the globe. They had found an empty, predator-free world, rich in food. And in this new world, free from the constraints of gravity, they exploded in size. The late Eocene, around 40 to 34 million years ago, was the age of the first whale giants, and the king of these giants was Basilosaurus. The name Basilosaurus means king lizard, and it was a mistake. When its colossal fossils were first discovered in the southern United States in the 1830s, they were so enormous and snake-like that they were assumed to belong to a giant marine reptile, a sea serpent from the age of dinosaurs. It was only later that the anatomist Richard Owen recognized the mammalian teeth and declared it a mammal. But the name, king lizard, stuck. Basilosaurus was a monster. It was one of the largest animals of its time, stretching up to 18 meters or 60 feet in length. But its body was not like a modern whale. It was incredibly long, slender, and serpentine. It moved not with the grace of a dolphin, but with a powerful, undulating, eel-like motion. Its head was large, the size of a bathtub, and its snout was filled with a terrifying array of teeth. Unlike modern toothed whales, which have simple, peg-like teeth for grasping, Basilosaurus had a full set of differentiated, complex teeth. Sharp, conical incisors at the front for snatching, and large, triangular, serrated cheek teeth at the back for shearing and slicing. This was an apex predator, a killer of other large prey. We know from fossil evidence, including the stomach contents of one Basilosaurus and bite marks on other fossils, that it hunted. It ate large fish, sharks, and, most tellingly, other smaller whales. Basilosaurus was the Eocene's killer whale, a true sea monster that ruled the warm, global oceans. But the most fascinating, and perhaps most poignant, feature of Basilosaurus is not its size or its teeth. It is its legs. If you were to examine the long, serpentine body of this 60-foot giant, you would find, tucked away near its tail, a pair of tiny, perfectly formed, but utterly useless hind legs. They were complete with a femur, a tibia, a fibula, and even tiny articulated toes. But they were only about 1.5 feet long. They were not even connected to the animal's spine. They simply floated, embedded in its muscle. They were, without a doubt, the last fading echo of its land-dwelling ancestors, a ghostly reminder of Pakicetus and the long walk to the sea. They were evolutionary baggage, a use-it-or-lose-it trait that had been lost. We can only speculate as to their function. Perhaps they were used as claspers during mating, but they served no purpose in locomotion. They are one of the most powerful and beautiful pieces of evidence for evolution, a vestigial signature of a world left behind. Basilosaurus was not alone in these late Eocene seas. It shared its world with another, smaller cetacean, Dorudon. Dorudon was much more whale-like in our modern sense. It was smaller, around 16 feet long, with a more compact, dolphin-like body. It was clearly a powerful, fast swimmer. We often find Dorudon fossils in the same locations as Basilosaurus. For a long time, they were thought to be the juveniles of Basilosaurus, but the discovery of pregnant Dorudon and newborns proved they were a distinct species, and the relationship between them seems to have been a dark one. We find juvenile Dorudon skulls with distinctive, Basilosaurus-sized bite marks, the serrated teeth a perfect match. It seems the king lizard was preying on its smaller, more agile cousins. We know this world so intimately because of one of the most remarkable fossil sites on Earth, Wadi al-Haytham, the Valley of Whales in the Egyptian desert. What is today a windswept, hyper-arid desert was, 40 million years ago, a shallow, protected bay of the Tethys Sea, a kind of nursery or calving ground for these early whales. Today, the desert floor is littered with the skeletons of Basilosaurus and Dorudon, preserved in stunning, three-dimensional detail.